Hey! This isn't some hillbilly farm, this is a neighborhood, Karen screeched, knocking over a basket of heirloom tomatoes like she was avenging a personal vendetta. Juice exploded across the sidewalk. Go sell this dirt at a flea market or wherever it is your kind crawl out from. And just like that, my entire Sunday, my peaceful morning, my humble tomato stand, and maybe a piece of my soul, was flattened under a designer's sandal and a tidal wave of entitlement. But what Karen didn't know was this: I don't break easy. I plant deep. And when you stomp on a seed, you just bury it deeper where it grows stronger. Before all this madness, I was just a regular guy with a quiet backyard hobby. I didn't have beef with anybody, not even the HOA. I worked remote tech jobs, kept to myself, and grew tomatoes because I loved it. San Marzanos, Brandywines, Cherokee Purples, you name it, I grew it. My yard wasn't flashy. No pristine fountain or overpriced turf, just rows of green, sun-warmed vines and the smell of homegrown life. People passing by would wave and ask what I was growing. Sometimes I'd offer a tomato or two. Then someone asked if I sold them. I shrugged. Why not? It started simple. One little wooden table with a "tomatoes, pay what you want" sign. A small basket, a cash box, and a folding chair. It was more about the connection than the money. Neighbors dropped by with smiles. Kids picked their favorite. Elderly Mrs. Gonzalez swore my tomatoes cured her arthritis, though I suspected it was just the salt-free diet her doctor forced her onto. For a few weekends, it felt like I'd accidentally tapped into something real, something that brought people together. And then came Karen. She didn't introduce herself. No, she descended. Tight ponytail, yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and an aura of superiority that could sterilize weeds at 50 feet. The first time she approached my stand, she didn't even look at the tomatoes. She just pointed at my homemade sign and said, "This is not an approved commercial activity." I blinked. "It's tomatoes," I said. "From my yard." She scoffed. "It's a business. We don't allow yard businesses in this neighborhood." Then she whipped out her phone and snapped a picture of my stand, of me, even of the cash box, like I was laundering money through produce. "This is all going to the HOA." At first, I thought she was bluffing. I wasn't violating anything serious, right? It wasn't even technically a business. No signs on the street, no advertising, no traffic congestion. But sure enough, the next day, a letter from the HOA appeared in my mailbox. Unauthorized commercial display. A $50 fine. I almost laughed. Almost. Then I noticed my irrigation system wasn't working. The hose had been punctured, slashed near the connection point. Clean cut. Karen-style clean. Still, I wasn't about to pack it in. I patched the hose, moved the stand back a couple feet onto my lawn, and made a new sign. Homegrown tomatoes, donation only. The community loved it even more. They brought jars of homemade jam, recipes, even a handwritten thank you note from a teenager who said my tomatoes were the best part of his grandma's summer salad. My stand wasn't a nuisance. It was becoming a neighborhood gem. Which, of course, made Karen hate it even more. She doubled down. One morning I found dog waste smeared on the front of my stand. Another time, my tomato baskets had been turned over, the fruit kicked into the street. I installed a security camera. That's when I caught her. At 5:37 a.m., wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, sneaking onto my lawn like some kind of HOA ninja and dumping what looked like weed killer near my Brandywines. I couldn't prove it was her exactly, but the footage was enough to show some sort of sabotage. I posted a still on our community Facebook group with the caption, "Neighborhood Tomato Bandit Strikes Again." It exploded. Karen, of course, went ballistic. She denied everything. Accused me of harassment. Called an emergency HOA meeting about hostile agriculture behavior. Her latest claim? That the smell of tomato vines was aggravating her allergies. She even held up a crumpled tissue during the meeting like it was Exhibit A. I tried to reason with her, calmly suggesting maybe she just walk a different way. That only fueled her fury. "This is a neighborhood, not a farm," she snapped. "If you want to play Little House on the Prairie, go buy a barn." I wanted to walk away. I really did. I kept telling myself, don't escalate. It's not worth it. But when I came home one Sunday to find my entire stand flipped upside down, wood splintered, tomatoes mashed into the pavement like roadkill, and a handwritten note saying, "Get a real job, loser," something inside me snapped. I stood in the wreckage, tomato pulp on my shoes, and watched across the street as Karen and her friends sipped mimosas on her perfectly polished patio. They laughed at something. Probably me. That's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before: her driveway. More specifically, the narrow strip of city-owned grass adjacent to it, technically not part of her property. My wheels started turning. My fingers itched. And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about gardening anymore. I was thinking about permits, about zoning, about a new kind of stand. Something bigger. Something that couldn't be crushed with one stomp and a scowl. So I walked inside, opened my laptop, and began typing. The next weekend, Karen woke up to a very different scene. There were tents, tables, colorful signs, musicians, a chalkboard reading, "Welcome to Tomato Town Community Farmers Market, approved by the city." And directly in front of her driveway, a booth selling roasted corn, positioned just so. With plenty of traffic. No way in, no way out. And that was just the beginning. She wanted war? She just declared it on a farmer. The sun rose over the neighborhood like it always did, but this time, it found itself shining down on a very different Sunday morning. Gone were the quiet lawns and early joggers. In their place, a bustling collection of tents, tables, signs, and a dozen excited voices setting up the inaugural launch of what I dubbed Tomato Town. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours, running on adrenaline, righteous spite, and a gallon of coffee. But the look on Karen's face when she stepped outside in her bathrobe, clutching her green smoothie, and realized she was blocked in by a booth selling handmade soaps, that was the caffeine I really needed. She stormed to the edge of her driveway, mouth opening and closing like a fish in a yoga wrap. "What is this?" she barked at the poor beekeeper setting up next to her curb. He blinked. "Farmer's Market," he said cheerfully, gesturing to the sign that read, "City-approved community swap, hosted by Tomato Town." Her head snapped toward my tent. I was already mid-sale, handing a little girl a pint of cherry tomatoes, while her dad paid me with a fresh-baked loaf of sourdough. I waved at Karen. She did not wave back. The truth was, this wasn't some off-the-book stunt. After she destroyed my tomato stand for the third time, I dove headfirst into the city's zoning and permit labyrinth. I learned that the grassy strip next to her driveway wasn't her property, it belonged to the city. And that the city had a community event initiative that allowed small farmers markets with appropriate sign-off. I had those signatures. I had the insurance waiver. I had even looped in a local charity so we could claim a percentage of proceeds went toward school garden programs. It was all airtight. Karen could scream until her vocal cords gave out, and she'd still be blocked by a booth selling organic lavender oils and pickled beet. Word spread fast. The market had barely been open 20 minutes before half the neighborhood was walking over, shopping bags swinging and reusable cups in hand. I had volunteers helping direct people, chalk arrows on the sidewalk, and even a little busker playing acoustic covers of Taylor Swift next to the zucchini table. By 10 a.m., we had a full-blown crowd. Karen stood on her driveway like a general surveying a battlefield she didn't understand and had already lost. At 10:07, the cops showed up. Karen must have called them the moment she realized she was trapped. 2 officers walked through the market, mildly intrigued by the homemade jams and hand-carved spoons on display. When they got to me, I handed them copies of my permit packet, neatly stapled. One of the officers nodded and said, "Looks like everything's in order. Busy day, huh?" I offered him a sample of sun-dried tomatoes. He took 2. Karen came stomping over, voice high and sharp. He's blocking my property. This is illegal obstruction. One of the officers turned to her calmly. Ma'am, the booths are on city easement, not your private property. There's no violation here. She gaped at him, then at me. I shrugged, holding up my own smoothie. Cucumber mint. Want one? As the officers moved on, Karen stood there trembling with suppressed rage. Then, in a moment that could only be described as karmic gold, a group of toddlers with face paint ran straight through her flower bed trying to chase a bubble machine. She screamed. Their parents apologized profusely. One kid shouted, "That lady's house smells like broccoli," and it became the catchphrase of the day. Someone wrote it on a chalkboard. Over the next week, I didn't just keep the market going, I expanded it. I reached out to more local vendors, artists, gardeners, even a guy who raised heritage chickens and brought eggs so fresh they were still warm. The market grew like a weed, every booth a little rebellion against Karen's carefully manicured tyranny. She started erecting barricades, cones, signs, even tied some of those ridiculous garden gnomes together like they were guarding her perimeter. Someone knitted tiny protest hats for them. One wore a sign that said, "Free the tomatoes." The HOA wasn't far behind. Karen stormed into the next meeting with pictures, complaints, and a binder thicker than a wedding album. She ranted about traffic, smells, noise, and anarchist pickles. But the tide had turned. The very neighbors she used to boss around were now my vendors, my customers, my biggest fans. They countered with testimonials. How the market brought joy, boosted small business, and gave the community something to actually enjoy on weekends. One man even said his marriage had improved since he started selling salsa. His wife nodded solemnly. The kicker came when I brought up a clause buried deep in the HOA charter, one that clearly stated properties like mine, developed prior to the HOA's formation, were grandfathered into non-commercial exemptions if the city permitted it. I had that paperwork too. Karen's face turned the color of an overripe tomato. The board voted to review the matter further, which, in HOA speak, means we're too afraid to fight this. Then came the t-shirt incident. A local screen printer, seeing the popularity of the market and the Karen drama, made shirts that read Tomato Town, EST in spite and I survived the HOA apocalypse. They sold out in a day. One booth even sold Karen caricature mugs, each one stamped with her iconic quote, "This is a neighborhood, not a farm." Karen tried to sue. The screen printer countersued for harassment. The case didn't even make it past the intake clerk. I'll admit there was a moment, just one, when I felt a little bad. Watching Karen sitting on her porch, arms folded, staring at the now weekly crowd bustling across the street from her, I saw a flicker of something beneath the fury. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the realization that control, once lost, doesn't return quietly. But that moment faded fast when she called the fire department claiming someone had set up an illegal flame source near her azaleas. It was a portable kettle corn popper. They gave her a warning for a false report. Despite everything, I wasn't out for total destruction. I didn't want to ruin her life. I just wanted her to stop ruining everyone else's. But every time she tried to crush the market, it just grew bigger. The corn vendor brought friends. The face painter added a puppet show. Someone brought goats for a petting zoo and named one of them Karen. That goat became a celebrity. People took selfies with it, tagged it #GOATKaren, and I swear a candle vendor started calling her lavender blend Karen repellent. The best part? The market started turning a real profit. Not just for me but for everyone. We set up a donation box for local food pantries. We offered free produce bags for seniors. Kids got free sunflowers. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a full-on revolution in garden fresh form. And Karen? She still stood on her porch every Sunday, watching from behind her reflective sunglasses, jaw clenched tight enough to crush walnuts. But she didn't realize something critical. She hadn't just sparked a conflict. She'd planted the seed of a movement. And now? It was harvest season. Karen wasn't done. If anything, the success of Tomato Town seemed to light a new kind of fire under her, one fueled not just by her hatred of non-regulation tomatoes, but by public embarrassment. Her front yard had gone from being the pride of the block to the reluctant background of Instagram stories, YouTube vlogs, and even a local newspaper feature with the headline, "Neighborhood Market Grows Where HOA Tried to Weed It Out." There was a photo of me holding a basket of tomatoes next to a kid dressed as a giant carrot. Karen's mailbox had been cropped out, but everyone knew whose lawn stood fuming in the background. That same day, she started handing out printed flyers door to door claiming the market was illegal, disruptive, and a threat to community values. Her words, not mine. The following Sunday, we found half those flyers stuffed in the compost bin next to the free herb station. The other half had been turned into paper hats by a group of kids running a lemonade stand called Sour But Sweet. Karen accused them of weaponized sarcasm. One of the kids asked if she wanted a cup. She nearly exploded. The next move in her war plan was a cease and desist letter. It was printed on cream-colored parchment and delivered in a manila envelope that smelled faintly of perfume and vinegar. The letter was riddled with legal-sounding jargon and listed about 10 imaginary laws I'd supposedly broken, including one that referenced vibrational disturbances due to artisanal music. I forwarded the letter to my cousin Dean, a property lawyer who loved this kind of drama like most people love baseball. Dean called me laughing so hard he snorted. "She wrote this using a template from a real estate blog and a thesaurus," he said. "It's legally worth about as much as a wet paper towel." Dean drafted a formal response, included actual citations, and sent it back through certified mail. Karen received it, read 2 lines, then ripped it up dramatically in the middle of her driveway. Someone caught it on video. We played it on loop at the community booth under a sign that read, "Karen's Greatest Hits," now showing on the side of the salsa tent. That might have been the end of it if she hadn't escalated again. We had just wrapped a particularly successful Sunday, with record foot traffic thanks to a food truck selling plant-based tacos and an impromptu dance performance by a local high school group. Everyone was packing up when someone noticed a few vendors' tables had weird white powder sprinkled along the legs. At first we thought it was flour or some spilled seasoning. But then the honey vendor's crate of jars began attracting swarms of ants, way more than usual. Another vendor found a half-opened container labeled roach-confused dust, hidden behind their display. Suspicion spread like wildfire. People whispered, glanced toward Karen's yard. She was inside, but her curtain moved once like she was watching. No one had proof, not yet. But I'd seen enough to take it seriously. That night, I reviewed the footage from the security camera hidden in the birdhouse facing the sidewalk. At around 4:12 a.m., a figure in a wide hoodie crept along the booths, sprinkling something from a pouch. The person tripped over a tomato crate and muttered a very distinct, nasal, Karen-like ugh. The next frame caught a glint of reflective sunglasses, even in the moonlight. I took the footage and brought it to the neighborhood watch meeting. Karen was there too, sitting near the snacks like she hadn't been trying to poison the community's eggplants. When the footage played, her face stayed frozen, eyes twitching only slightly. When someone asked if it was her, she said, "No comment," and left with 3 oatmeal cookies shoved into her handbag. The vote to formally ban her from future meetings passed unanimously. Her reputation took a nosedive after that. People who once feared her now openly mocked her. A group of teens created a TikTok trend where they pretended to be vegetables hiding from HOA persecution. One video had a carrot hiding behind a bush whispering, "She's coming, pretend you're store-bought." It went viral. Karen tried reporting the videos. The app responded with a cheerful, generic message and no action taken. But her next move wasn't digital, it was bureaucratic. She convinced the HOA to hire a private inspector to evaluate the market for health and safety violations. The man showed up with a clipboard, sunglasses, and the confidence of someone who once shut down a lemonade stand in 1998 and never recovered. He tried to cite us for things like improper apple stacking and suspicious compost odor. I asked to see his credentials. He flashed something blurry and quickly pocketed it. One of our vendors, the kombucha brewer, took a photo and reverse image searched it. It was a fake badge from a cosplay site. His ID number was literally H0AK1NG. I called the actual city health inspector, who came down later that week. She walked through the market, tried the pickled okra, complimented the compost system, and left with a bag of jalapenos. Her official report gave us the highest possible rating. Karen, meanwhile, was warned by the city for impersonating an enforcement officer by proxy. I framed the letter and hung it in my garage. The final blow that week came unexpectedly. A YouTuber who specialized in neighborhood drama and petty justice stumbled upon our story and did a full video breakdown titled Karen vs. Tomato Town, a saga of lettuce and lies. It had everything: footage, interviews, memes, and even a dramatic voiceover reading of Karen's cease and desist letter. Within 3 days, the video had over 2 million views. Local news picked it up. The market saw visitors from 3 counties over. One guy drove 2 hours just to take a photo next to the goat named Karen. The goat was unfazed. And just like that, the market wasn't just a petty response anymore. It was a destination. What had started as a tiny tomato stand now had momentum bigger than anyone could have predicted. But Karen? She didn't see a joyful community or a thriving small business collective. She saw noise. She saw rebellion. She saw her grip on the neighborhood slipping through her fingers. So she did what Karens do when the leash of control is snapped. She turned to legal threats once again. This time, she filed a claim against me personally in small claims court. The charge? Willful psychological stress and economic damage due to non-sanctioned neighbor behavior. It was the legal equivalent of throwing a tantrum in a 3-piece suit. And once again, I handed the case over to my cousin Dean, who was now so invested in the drama he'd started wearing Team Tomato pins on his lapel. When the court date came, Karen arrived with a binder that looked like a murder board in PowerPoint form. Charts, photos, maps of parking patterns. Dean calmly stood, presented our permits, community testimonials, and finished with a slideshow of the ways the market supported local charities and improved neighborhood morale. When the judge asked if Karen had any actual damages, she claimed her hedges were emotionally distressed. The courtroom laughed. The judge dismissed the case in less than 15 minutes. Karen stormed out of the courtroom without a word, her shoes clicking like war drums across the marble floor. But even as she disappeared through the double doors, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had one more trick up her sleeve. And whatever it was, I knew she'd make it big. The war wasn't over. It was just getting right. For a brief moment, it almost felt like peace. The market was thriving, the tomatoes were redder than ever, and Karen had gone quiet. Too quiet. Every Sunday, she'd still sit on her porch with her sunglasses, arms crossed like a disapproving statue, but she didn't speak to anyone. She didn't scream at vendors, didn't call the cops, didn't even glare as hard. A few neighbors thought maybe she'd finally accepted defeat, maybe even realized the market was good for the community. I wasn't naive. I knew her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The quiet ended on a Wednesday. I came home from running errands and found a stack of unfamiliar flyers taped to every mailbox on the block. Important notice: Farmers Market canceled this Sunday due to permit revocation. The flyer bore a fake city seal and some made-up contact number. It looked official, if you didn't know better. My phone lit up within minutes. Vendors, volunteers, customers all asking what was going on. I ran to the front yard and saw 2 elderly neighbors standing in confusion, one already turning back home with a basket of preserves she was going to donate. Karen had struck again. But this time I was ready. I walked across the street, knocked on Karen's door, and stood waiting while she let the seconds stretch just to be difficult. When she finally opened it, she had the audacity to smile. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly, like she hadn't just tried to dismantle a community with a Xerox machine. I held up the flyer. "Nice font choice. Looks almost believable." She didn't even flinch. "Oh, I just got that too. Terrible shame." She began to close the door. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "The city already confirmed my permits are fine. But thanks for reminding me to install security cameras on the mailboxes." Karen's door shut with a click, but she wasn't done. She just moved on to the next phase. That Friday, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside her house. A man in a slick suit stepped out and began taking photos of my property, of the tents, of the curbside area. He walked the street with an iPad, murmuring into his Bluetooth. "He wasn't from the city?" I asked. "He was a private consultant for urban redevelopment." A neighbor overheard him telling Karen, "We're ready to make an offer." That's when it hit me. Karen was trying to sell her house. Not to leave, no. Karen had a plan. If she couldn't destroy the market through sabotage or legal threats, she'd try to kill it at the root. Her house sat across from the city easement, and her driveway, once just an unfortunate casualty of our layout, was now her golden ticket. If she sold her house to the right buyer, someone with enough money and clout to develop or shut down the market area, she could choke us out with construction or zoning pressure. And she thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. And I made a few calls of my own. The next Sunday, Karen stood smugly on her driveway as the market swirled around her, not knowing the developer she thought she'd partnered with was, in fact, someone I'd planted. Technically, it was my old college roommate Mason, who now ran a nonprofit that developed green spaces in urban areas. He'd posed as a buyer, listened to her gloat, and agreed to match any market value offer if she signed fast. She signed fast. Her ego had blinded her to the details, and as soon as the ink dried, Mason filed the paperwork not for demolition or redevelopment, but for the construction of a community greenhouse and sustainability education center, to be built on the far edge of her former driveway's easement zone. When Karen found out, she erupted. She tried to cancel the sale. She screamed at her realtor, claimed fraud, claimed coercion. But everything had been legal. Everything had been recorded. And she had no grounds to stop it. Her only option was to pack up or stay in a house she no longer owned, adjacent to a market that was growing like the tomatoes she hated. She chose neither. Karen vanished for 3 days. No one saw her. Her car was gone, her curtains were drawn, and the market ran smoother than ever. Vendors were thriving, the salsa tent was doing 3 times its usual business, and we had our first live cooking demonstration. Everyone was in high spirits, until a siren wailed down the street during cleanup. The fire department arrived, lights flashing. They parked in front of Karen's house, where smoke was curling up from a trash can in her front yard. Not flames, just thick smoke, like someone had lit a bonfire of legal documents. A few minutes later, Karen emerged, coughing dramatically. When asked what happened, she claimed someone from the market had thrown a lit cigarette into her yard, setting her trash on fire. The firefighters looked at the bin. Inside were torn papers, what looked like burned t-shirt scraps, and melted plastic. There were no cigarettes, but they gave her a warning for improper disposal and left. Karen followed them halfway down the block, pleading for some kind of citation against us. They ignored her. That night, she tried one final Hail Mary. At 2 a.m, I got a call from Dean. Karen had filed for an emergency injunction to block the market from operating within 200 feet of her residence due to continuous psychological harassment, undue noise, and agricultural trauma. I didn't even know that last one was a phrase. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Dean told me to be there early. We showed up with a stack of permits, character witnesses, media clips, and 3 elderly neighbors ready to testify about how the market had helped them combat loneliness. Karen showed up with a folder of memes, some blurry photos, and a printed screenshot of someone calling her Queen Vinegar on Reddit. The judge listened. Patiently. She asked questions. She reviewed Karen's evidence in silence, occasionally sighing. When it was our turn, Dean presented everything: how the market improved property values, how it had generated over $10,000 in local charitable donations, how it provided a safe, social space for the community. The judge turned to Karen and asked, "Have you suffered any verifiable damage?" Karen stammered. "My plants are dying. My weekends are ruined. I can't back out of my driveway without being stared at by a goat named after me." There was a pause. The judge looked over her glasses and said, "Ma'am, none of that is illegal. In fact, it sounds like the community is thriving in spite of your efforts." Injunction denied. Karen let out a sound I can only describe as a blend of gasping, snorting, and disbelief. She turned bright red and stormed out of the courtroom. Dean patted me on the back. "That was satisfying," he said. "Also, I want to buy one of those Karen mugs." Back home, the vendors had already heard the news. They were setting up early, stringing lights between booths, prepping for our biggest weekend yet. I stood on my lawn, staring at Karen's house, wondering if she was packing or planning another move. Either way, it didn't matter. The market was here to stay. And next week, the community greenhouse would break ground, right next to the driveway she tried to weaponize. We weren't just growing tomatoes anymore. We were growing roots. Sunday morning came like the beginning of a new chapter, literally and figuratively. The air buzzed not just with the scent of fresh basil and warm bread, but with something deeper, something earned. People didn't just come to Tomato Town anymore for the produce. They came because it felt like home. What started as a stand with a cardboard sign had turned into a village of color and laughter, a space that somehow made every person feel like they belonged. It was bigger than me, way bigger than tomatoes. But even on that bright morning, I couldn't help glancing across the street toward the now quiet, almost ghostly shell of Karen's former kingdom. The sale had gone through completely, and Mason's nonprofit team had already begun marking out the area for the greenhouse. Karen hadn't been seen in days. No angry rants, no surveillance from behind her blinds, not even a car in the driveway. The house looked frozen in time, like she'd left in a fury and hadn't figured out where to go next. Some said she'd moved into a friend's place temporarily. Others joked she was holed up in an undisclosed location drafting a new HOA constitution. Whatever the case, the silence was strange, but not unwelcome. Vendors were in top form. The honey guy had a new cinnamon blend that practically flew off the table. The goat named Karen wore a sunflower crown. A local artist painted a mural on a plywood board near the compost station, showing vines wrapping around a brick wall and bursting through with tomatoes, bees, and dancing carrots. Kids gathered around it, adding their own doodles in chalk. It wasn't just a market anymore. It was art, therapy, rebellion, and celebration all in one space. And somehow it all worked. As the day progressed, we held our first harvest contest. People entered their weirdest-shaped vegetables, and a man named Doug won with a potato that somehow looked like Elvis. A live band played folksy covers. There was even a surprise flash mob during the salsa tasting event, which I absolutely had nothing to do with despite everyone pointing fingers. It was chaos, and it was beautiful. Around midday, as I was restocking the heirloom tomato crates, I heard a voice behind me. Calm, unexpected, and weirdly familiar. Those Cherokee purples still got that smoky kick? I turned around and nearly dropped the crate. Karen stood there. Not in her battle-ready gear, not in her HOA badge-wielding regalia, but in jeans, sneakers, and a plain t-shirt. No sunglasses, no clipboard. Just Karen, looking like someone who'd aged 10 years in a month and finally realized she couldn't control the tide. I blinked, unsure if I was hallucinating due to sun exposure or some weird karmic prank. "They're better than ever," I said slowly. "Want to try one?" She nodded. I handed her one. She bit into it, juice dribbling slightly down her wrist. For the first time, her face softened. Not into a smile, but not into the usual scowl either. Somewhere in between, like someone exhaling after holding their breath for too long. "This used to be peaceful," she said. "Before all the music and laughter and signs. Before people parked in front of my house." I waited. The words were pointed, but the delivery wasn't sharp. More reflective than aggressive. "You started it," I said. "You kicked over my stand." She nodded again. "Yeah. I did." That threw me off more than anything. I expected denial, excuses, maybe even another rant. But not an admission. Not from her. "I don't know what I thought would happen," she said after a pause. "Maybe I wanted things to feel like I controlled something. After my husband passed, I just filled the silence with rules. I thought if I kept everything in line, nothing else would fall apart. Now I was the one silent. I hadn't known about her husband. No one had mentioned it. And I suddenly saw the past few months not as a series of battles, but as someone unraveling and clinging to structure like a life raft. It didn't excuse her behavior. But it explained it. "Doesn't mean you had to go full HOA supervillain," I finally said. That earned a faint smile. "No. It doesn't." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by noise and motion, as kids screamed joyfully over balloon animals and someone belted out an off-key version of Jolene. Karen looked around like she was seeing it all for the first time. Not the chaos but the joy. Not the inconvenience but the connection. "So what now?" I asked her. She looked down at the half-eaten tomato in her hand, then toward the booth across the way where a woman was selling potted herbs and hand-stitched tote bags. "I might get some basil," she said. "And maybe a tote bag that doesn't say no fun zone." Good start. She turned to leave, then stopped. "You really built something here. Something that mattered. I hated it because I didn't understand it. But you fought for it. I respect that. Even if I was awful about it." I watched her cross the market, stopping to look at the mural, even tossing a few dollars into the tip jar of the busker playing mandolin. No speeches. No drama. Just a quiet truce. Maybe not redemption, but something close enough for now. By the end of the day, the greenhouse plot was officially marked. We celebrated with sparklers and free jars of salsa. A drone camera flew overhead, filming for a follow-up piece a local news outlet was running. I stood back, letting everyone enjoy the moment, and just took it all in. The house across the street would eventually be sold again. Karen might come back or she might disappear forever. But the market would stay. The people would stay. The mural would grow, the greenhouse would bloom, and the community that started from one tiny table of tomatoes would keep thriving. Later that evening, as the vendors packed up and the sky turned gold, I sat under the shade of my front tree, sipping a cold drink. The goat named Karen nuzzled my knee briefly before wandering off. And then, as if fate couldn't help itself, I spotted something on my porch. A small paper bag with a sticky note. No name. Just one sentence. "For what it's worth, your tomatoes really are that good." Inside was a new pair of gardening gloves. The good kind. Heavy-duty, breathable, no nonsense. The kind you buy when you finally admit that gardening isn't just a hobby anymore, it's part of who you are. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Not because I won. Not because she lost. But because somewhere between the soil, the salsa, and the squabbles, something bigger had taken root. Tomato Town wasn't just a comeback. It was a revolution wrapped in vines. And it all started with a woman who hated vegetables and a guy who refused to stop growing them.